Margaret Maggie Thompson had always been a woman of routine. At 78 years old, she found comfort in the predictability of her days, which unfolded like chapters in a well-worn book. Each morning began with the soft chime of her alarm clock at 6:30, followed by a cup of Earl Grey tea brewed just strong enough to wake her fully but not so bitter as to ruin the day ahead. She would sit by the window in her cozy kitchen, watching the sun rise over the sleepy town where she'd lived nearly all her life. The world outside moved slowly here, just how she liked it. Maggie's home was modest, tucked away on a tree-lined street lined with houses that seemed frozen in time. Her garden was her pride and joy, bursting with vibrant blooms even in late autumn. Marigolds, daisies, and pansies fought valiantly against the encroaching chill, their colors brightening an otherwise muted landscape. Neighbors often stopped to admire her handiwork, though few lingered long enough to chat. To many, Maggie was simply the nice old lady who grows flowers, a figure familiar yet unremarkable in their daily lives. But Maggie didn't mind being overlooked. In fact, she preferred it. After losing her husband, Harold, 10 years earlier, she'd learned to find solace in solitude. Her children had grown up and moved away, building lives of their own far beyond the confines of their small hometown. Letters and phone calls kept them connected, but they rarely visited anymore. And while part of Maggie missed the laughter and chaos of family gatherings, another part cherished the quiet freedom that came with independence. Her days followed a rhythm as steady as the ticking of the antique grandfather clock in her living room. After breakfast, she'd tend to her garden or run errands around town. By noon, she'd head to the library, where she volunteered sorting books and assisting patrons. It wasn't glamorous work, but it gave her purpose, a reason to step out into the world each day. In the evenings, she'd settle into her favorite armchair with a good book or a crossword puzzle, letting the hum of the television fill the silence. Despite the simplicity of her existence, Maggie harbored no regrets. She'd lived a full life, filled with love, loss, and countless moments worth remembering. Yet there were times when she wondered if anyone truly saw her anymore, if anyone noticed the person behind the polite smiles and gentle demeanor. Sometimes, standing in line at the grocery store or waiting for her turn at the pharmacy counter, she felt invisible, swallowed whole by a society that valued youth and productivity above all else. Still, she carried on, choosing kindness over bitterness, patience over frustration. It was during one such ordinary day, an unremarkable Tuesday in early November, that fate decided to intervene. The air was crisp and cool as Maggie stepped out of her house, bundled in a thick wool coat and scarf. Autumn had painted the trees in shades of amber and gold, their leaves carpeting the sidewalks in a mosaic of color. She took a deep breath, savoring the earthy scent of fallen foliage mixed with the faint aroma of wood smoke drifting from nearby chimneys. Today's errand list was short: pick up groceries, drop off a donation at the library, and perhaps treat herself to a pastry from the bakery downtown. Nothing out of the ordinary awaited her, or so she thought. As she strolled through the park on her way to the grocery store, something caught her eye. Beneath the sprawling branches of an ancient oak tree sat a young man, hunched over on a weathered bench. His clothes were threadbare, his face shadowed by a scruffy beard. A crumpled map lay discarded beside him, its edges frayed and torn. He stared blankly at the ground, oblivious to the world around him, or so it seemed. Maggie hesitated for a moment, debating whether to approach him. Strangers in distress weren't uncommon in the park. She'd seen plenty of people nursing broken hearts or seeking refuge from life's storms. But there was something about this young man that tugged at her heartstrings. Perhaps it was the way his shoulders slumped under the weight of whatever burden he carried. Or maybe it was the faint tremor in his hands as he clutched the map tightly, as if afraid to let go. Whatever the reason, Maggie couldn't ignore the pang of empathy rising within her. Gathering her courage, she crossed the distance between them, her footsteps crunching softly on the frost-kissed grass. When she reached the bench, she cleared her throat gently to announce her presence. "Excuse me," she said, her voice warm and inviting. "Are you all right?" The young man looked up, startled. His eyes widened slightly, as if surprised to find someone addressing him. For a brief moment, Maggie thought he might ignore her altogether. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he nodded slowly. "I'm okay," he replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. His voice was hoarse, tinged with exhaustion and sadness. "Just trying to figure out where I am." Maggie smiled kindly, lowering herself onto the bench beside him. Up close, she could see the toll life had taken on him. Dark circles ringed his eyes, and his cheeks were hollow, as if he hadn't eaten properly in days. Despite his disheveled appearance, there was a glimmer of intelligence in his gaze. a spark that hinted at a brighter past buried beneath layers of hardship. Well, she said lightly, you're in Maplewood Park. Not exactly the center of the universe, but it's got its charms. She paused, studying him carefully. Do you have somewhere to stay tonight? He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the question. Finally, he shook his head. No, he admitted quietly. I've been moving around, trying to find work. Something about his response struck a chord deep within Maggie. She remembered Harold telling her once that everyone has a story, even if they don't share it willingly. This young man's story, whatever it was written plainly across his face, in the lines etched prematurely around his eyes, in the way his fingers fidgeted nervously with the edge of the map. Without thinking twice, Maggie unwrapped the scarf from around her neck and handed it to him. Here, she said firmly. You'll catch your death sitting out here without proper warmth. The young man blinked in surprise, staring at the scarf as if unsure whether to accept it. I can't take this, he protested weakly. It's yours. And now it's yours, Maggie countered, pressing it into his hands. Consider it a loan until you get back on your feet. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, tentatively, the young man wrapped the scarf around his neck, murmuring a quiet thank you. His gratitude was palpable, radiating off him in waves. Encouraged by his response, Maggie gestured toward the cafe visible just beyond the park's edge. Come on, she urged. Let's get you some coffee, and maybe a bite to eat. My treat. He hesitated again, clearly unused to such generosity. But eventually, he nodded, allowing her to lead him across the park. As they walked side by side, Maggie introduced herself, keeping her tone light and conversational. I'm Maggie, by the way. What's your name? Alex. He stammered, still wary but beginning to relax. Thanks for everything. They settled into a corner booth at the cafe, steam rising from their mugs as they sipped hot tea. Slowly, Alex began opening up, sharing fragments of his story. He'd grown up in the city, he explained, working odd jobs to support himself after his parents passed away. Things had gone downhill quickly after he lost his apartment, a combination of bad luck and poor decisions. Now he was struggling to rebuild his life, piecing together scraps of hope wherever he could find them. Maggie listened intently, nodding occasionally but never interrupting. She understood the importance of feeling heard, especially when the rest of the world seemed determined to look the other way. When Alex finished speaking, she reached across the table, placing a gentle hand on his arm. You're stronger than you think, she told him earnestly. Life has a way of testing us, but it also gives us chances to start over. Don't give up. Tears welled in Alex's eyes, though he blinked them away quickly. Thank you, he whispered. I needed to hear that. Unbeknownst to either of them, a passerby seated nearby had been watching their interaction with growing interest. Pulling out her phone, she discreetly filmed the scene, capturing Maggie's compassionate gestures and Alex's tentative gratitude. Within minutes, the video was uploaded to social media with the caption, "This grandma just reminded me what humanity should look like." By the time Maggie returned home later that afternoon, the clip had already begun spreading like wildfire. Friends and neighbors started calling, asking if the woman in the video was really her. At first, Maggie dismissed their questions, assuming they were mistaken. But as the hours passed and more people reached out, she realized the truth. Her simple act of kindness had captured the world's attention. Reporters began arriving at her doorstep the next morning, eager to interview the kindness grandma who'd touched hearts worldwide. Cameras flashed through her windows, and strangers flooded her mailbox with letters praising her selflessness. Though overwhelmed by the sudden spotlight, Maggie remained steadfast in her humility. I didn't do anything special, she insisted during interviews. I just saw someone who needed a little warmth, and I gave it. What Maggie didn't know, at least not yet, was that Alex had secrets of his own, secrets that would soon come to light, threatening to complicate their newfound connection and challenge everything they thought they knew about kindness, trust, and redemption. For now, however, the world celebrated Maggie's gesture, proving that even the smallest acts of compassion could spark extraordinary change. The morning after Maggie's encounter with Alex began like any other, until she opened her front door to find a crowd gathered on her lawn. Reporters jostled for position, microphones thrust forward, cameras clicking furiously as they shouted questions at her. Startled, Maggie stepped back instinctively, clutching her robe tightly around herself. Miss Thompson, can you tell us more about your act of kindness yesterday? What inspired you to help that young man? How does it feel to be called the kindness grandma? Her mind raced, trying to process what was happening. She glanced toward the street, where news vans lined the curb, their satellite dishes pointed skyward like strange mechanical flowers. The sight was surreal, almost comical, if not for the overwhelming sense of intrusion. Maggie had always valued privacy, cherishing the quiet solitude of her home. Now it felt violated, stripped bare for public consumption. Shaking her head slightly, she managed a weak smile. "I'm sorry," she said softly, raising a hand to ward off the barrage of questions. "I don't have anything to say right now. Please respect my space." With that, she closed the door firmly, leaning against it as her heart pounded in her chest. For a moment, she stood frozen, listening to the muffled voices outside. Then, exhaling slowly, she moved to the kitchen to make herself a cup of tea, a ritual she hoped would ground her amidst the chaos. As the kettle whistled, Maggie's thoughts turned to Alex. What must he be going through? Had he seen the video? Was he safe? Guilt gnawed at her. She hadn't asked for his number or offered any concrete way to stay in touch. All she'd done was share warmth over coffee and a few kind words. Surely that wasn't enough to warrant such an outpouring of attention, or was it? Her musings were interrupted by a knock at the back door. Relieved to see Sarah, her granddaughter, standing there with a worried expression, Maggie ushered her inside quickly. "Oh, Grandma," Sarah sighed, hugging her tightly. "You've really blown up online. Everyone's talking about you." Maggie blinked, confused. "Blown up? I don't understand. Why are people making such a fuss over something so small?" Sarah chuckled, though her tone carried an edge of concern. "Because, Grandma, the world needs reminders like this. People are tired of negativity and division. They want to believe in goodness again, and you gave them hope." Though touched by Sarah's words, Maggie couldn't shake the feeling that this attention wasn't entirely deserved. Still, she allowed Sarah to guide her through the whirlwind of media requests, interviews, and messages pouring in from strangers worldwide. Together, they sifted through emails, social media comments, and letters, each one expressing gratitude, admiration, or personal stories inspired by Maggie's kindness. Among these heartfelt responses, however, were darker notes. One email stood out, its subject line stark and foreboding. "Stay away." Intrigued and unnerved, Maggie clicked it open to find a brief, cryptic message. "You don't know who you're dealing with. Leave him alone before it's too late." A shiver ran down her spine. Who was him? Did it refer to Alex? And why would someone warn her to stay away? Before she could dwell on it further, Sarah noticed her pale face and leaned over to read the message. "This isn't good," Sarah murmured, frowning. "We should report this to the police." But Maggie hesitated. Something about the warning felt personal, as if whoever sent it knew more than they let on. Against Sarah's protests, she decided to ignore it for now, focusing instead on the positive impact of her actions. Meanwhile, Alex was grappling with his own storm of emotions. After parting ways with Maggie the previous day, he'd returned to the park, unsure of what to do next. He'd spent the night curled up on a bench, wrapped in the scarf she'd given him, replaying their conversation in his mind. For the first time in months, he'd felt seen, not as a failure or a burden, but as a human being worthy of care. When he woke the next morning, his phone buzzed incessantly with notifications. At first, he assumed it was spam, but when he finally checked, he discovered hundreds of messages flooding his social media accounts. Followers of his blog, lost but finding, had recognized him in the viral video and were celebrating his reunion with Maggie as proof that kindness still existed in the world. At first, Alex felt overwhelmed by the support. Strangers praised him for opening up about his struggles, while others shared their own experiences of homelessness and resilience. It was humbling and terrifying. The last thing he wanted was pity or attention. Yet, as the hours passed, he realized this was an opportunity to amplify the message he'd been trying to spread all along, that everyone deserves dignity, no matter their circumstances. Determined to honor Maggie's gesture, Alex reached out to her via a local community center, leaving his contact information with the promise to repay her kindness somehow. When Maggie received the note later that afternoon, relief washed over her. Despite the warning swirling around her, she couldn't bring herself to turn away from Alex. If anything, the anonymous threat only deepened her resolve to uncover the truth. Their second meeting took place at the same cafe, though this time reporters lurked nearby, eager to capture another heartwarming moment. Ignoring the cameras, Maggie and Alex settled into their usual booth, picking up where they'd left off. "I didn't realize you wrote a blog," Maggie said, smiling warmly. "It's inspiring, what you're doing." Alex ducked his head, embarrassed. "It's nothing special, just a way to keep myself grounded, I guess." Well, it's helping people, Maggie replied firmly, and that makes it very special indeed. Over tea, they discussed how to channel the attention into something meaningful. Inspired by Maggie's humility, Alex suggested starting a foundation to support individuals experiencing homelessness and financial hardship. They named it the Maggie Thompson Kindness Initiative, dedicating it to fostering compassion and connection within communities. Word of the initiative spread rapidly, drawing donations and volunteers from across the globe. Local businesses pitched in, offering resources and expertise. Schools incorporated lessons on empathy and service into their curriculums. Even celebrities joined the movement, sharing stories of kindness inspired by Maggie's example. Yet, beneath the surface of this newfound success lay simmering tensions. As the foundation gained traction, critics began questioning Alex's involvement. Rumors surfaced about his past, his failed tech startup, allegations of unethical practices, and the scandal that had forced him underground. Though none of these claims were substantiated, they cast a shadow over the movement, threatening to undermine its credibility. One evening, as Maggie scrolled through her phone, she stumbled upon a scathing article accusing Alex of exploiting her kindness for personal gain. The headline screamed, "Kindness Grandma duped by fraudster." Furious, she confronted Sarah, who had been monitoring the backlash online. "They're twisting everything," Maggie exclaimed, slamming the phone onto the table. "Alex isn't using me. He's helping people. Why can't they see that?" Sarah sighed, rubbing her temples. "Grandma, I know you trust him, but we need to be careful. These accusations aren't coming out of nowhere. There's a reason people are suspicious." Reluctantly, Maggie agreed to investigate Alex's background further. With Sarah's help, she uncovered fragments of his story, the ambitious young entrepreneur who dreamed of changing the world, only to become entangled in corporate corruption. When the company collapsed, Alex had tried to expose the illegal activities of his business partners. But instead of vindication, he'd been scapegoated, vilified by the press, and ostracized by former colleagues. The revelation left Maggie reeling. How could someone so broken inspire such hatred? And why had he chosen to involve her in his redemption? Seeking answers, Maggie arranged a private meeting with Alex. Sitting across from him in her living room, she held his gaze steadily. "Tell me the truth," she said quietly. "Who are you really, Alex? And why are people attacking you?" For a long moment, Alex said nothing, his eyes clouded with emotion. Then, haltingly, he began to speak. He recounted the rise and fall of his startup, the betrayal by those he trusted most, and the years he'd spent wandering aimlessly, searching for purpose. His voice cracked as he admitted that meeting Maggie had reignited a spark of hope within him, a belief that perhaps he could rebuild not just his life, but also his reputation. "I'm not perfect," he confessed, tears streaming down his face. "But I swear to you, I'm not the monster they're making me out to be. All I want is to make things right, to help others avoid the mistakes I made." Maggie studied him carefully, weighing his words against the doubts swirling in her mind. Finally, she nodded. "All right," she said simply. "Then let's prove them wrong, together." From that day forward, Maggie threw herself wholeheartedly into the foundation, determined to clear Alex's name while continuing their mission. Together, they organized events, fundraisers, and awareness campaigns, showcasing real-life examples of kindness transforming lives. Slowly but surely, public perception began to shift. Skeptics softened, replaced by supporters eager to join the cause. But the challenges weren't over yet. Anonymous letters continued arriving at Maggie's doorstep, each one more ominous than the last. One warned her to leave town immediately. Another claimed Alex's enemies were planning revenge. Despite Sarah's pleas to step back, Maggie refused to abandon the movement or Alex. Late one night, unable to sleep, Maggie sat by her window, staring out at the darkened streets. Her mind replayed the events of recent weeks, the triumphs, the trials, the unanswered questions. She thought about Alex, about the scars he carried, both visible and invisible, and she wondered whether she truly understood the risks involved in standing by his side. Just then, a soft knock echoed through the house. Startled, Maggie rose cautiously, peering through the peephole. On the other side stood a shadowy figure cloaked in darkness. Heart pounding, she opened the door a crack. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice trembling. The figure stepped into the light, revealing a middle-aged woman with haunted eyes. "My name is Claire," she whispered urgently. "I knew Alex's business partner. You need to listen to me. It's not safe for either of you to keep doing this." Maggie hesitated, torn between fear and curiosity. Then, taking a deep breath, she stepped aside. "Come in," she said quietly. "Tell me everything." As Claire recounted the full extent of the conspiracy surrounding Alex's past, Maggie realized the stakes were higher than she'd imagined. Powerful figures implicated in the scandal saw the Foundation as a direct threat to their interests, and they weren't afraid to fight dirty. Despite the danger, Maggie resolved to stand firm. For every obstacle thrown her way, she found strength in knowing that even the smallest acts of kindness could spark extraordinary change. And as long as there were people willing to believe in goodness, she knew they couldn't lose. The momentum behind the Maggie Thompson Kindness Initiative continued to build, spreading like wildfire across communities worldwide. What had started as a simple act of compassion between two strangers had evolved into a global phenomenon, a testament to the power of human connection in an increasingly disconnected world. Yet, for all its successes, the movement carried a weight neither Maggie nor Alex had anticipated. As they worked tirelessly to sustain it, shadows of doubt crept closer, threatening to unravel everything they'd built. Each day brought fresh challenges. Donations poured in from generous supporters eager to contribute to the cause, but so did demands for transparency and accountability. Critics scrutinized every decision, questioning how funds were allocated and whether Alex's leadership was truly trustworthy. Anonymous trolls flooded social media with baseless accusations, sowing discord among followers who had once rallied enthusiastically behind the initiative. Despite these obstacles, Maggie remained steadfast, channeling her energy into fostering unity rather than division. One morning, as she sat at her kitchen table reviewing plans for an upcoming charity gala, Sarah entered the room holding a stack of letters. "More mail," she announced, setting them down with a sigh. "Some are supportive, but others aren't." Maggie nodded knowingly, reaching for the pile without hesitation. She'd grown accustomed to sorting through messages that ranged from heartfelt gratitude to venomous attacks. This time, however, one envelope stood out, a plain white sheet devoid of return address or postage stamp. Inside was another cryptic note. "Your foundation is built on lies. Stop now, or face the consequences." Her hands trembled slightly as she handed it to Sarah. "This isn't the first warning we've received," she admitted quietly, "but it feels different somehow, more personal." Sarah frowned, studying the note closely. "We can't ignore this anymore, Grandma. Whoever's sending these knows too much about what we're doing. They could hurt you, or worse." Though fear lingered at the edges of her mind, Maggie refused to let it dictate her actions. If anything, the threats only strengthened her resolve. "If we stop now," she said firmly, "then they win. Kindness isn't something that can be silenced, not by fear, not by hate." Determined to push forward, Maggie threw herself into preparations for the gala, which promised to be the largest event the foundation had hosted yet. Held at a grand hotel downtown, the evening would feature speeches, performances, and a silent auction aimed at raising funds for shelters and educational programs. It was also an opportunity to showcase the transformative impact of their work, proving to skeptics that their mission was genuine. Alex, meanwhile, wrestled with his own demons. Though grateful for Maggie's unwavering support, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was dragging her into danger. Each new accusation against him felt like a punch to the gut, dredging up memories of betrayal and failure he tried so hard to bury. At times, he considered stepping away from the foundation altogether, but the thought of abandoning Maggie after everything she'd done for him was unbearable. Their bond deepened during late-night strategy sessions over coffee and shared meals. Together, they crafted responses to critics, brainstormed ways to engage more volunteers, and dreamed of expanding the initiative to reach even greater heights. Through it all, Maggie reminded Alex of his worth, not defined by his past mistakes, but by the good he was capable of achieving. "You've already changed lives," she told him one evening as they finalized details for the gala. "Don't let anyone take that away from you." Despite her encouragement, Alex couldn't escape the gnawing suspicion that trouble loomed just beyond the horizon. His fears were realized when Claire, the mysterious woman who'd warned Maggie weeks earlier, reappeared unexpectedly on the eve of the gala. This time she came bearing evidence. Documents detailing illegal activities orchestrated by Alex's former business partner, along with incriminating emails linking powerful figures to the scandal. "I didn't want to believe it at first," Claire confessed, her voice trembling with emotion. "But the truth is ugly. These people will stop at nothing to protect themselves, including destroying anyone who gets in their way." As she spoke, Alex joined her on stage, handing her a folder containing Claire's documents. Together, they unveiled the evidence, detailing the illegal practices and cover-ups orchestrated by Alex's former partners. Gasps rippled through the crowd as reporters scrambled to document the moment, their cameras trained on Maggie and Alex like spotlights. The fallout was immediate and intense. Within hours, headlines blared accusations against the implicated individuals, sparking investigations that would eventually lead to arrests. Supporters praised Maggie and Alex for their bravery, hailing them as heroes willing to stand up for what was right. Critics, however, doubled down on their attacks, accusing them of orchestrating a publicity stunt designed to distract from Alex's tarnished reputation. Through it all, Maggie remained unfazed. She understood that progress rarely came without resistance, that true change required sacrifice and perseverance. And though the road ahead promised to be fraught with challenges, she knew they'd taken a crucial step toward justice. In the days following the gala, the foundation faced renewed scrutiny. Some donors withdrew their support, citing concerns about potential legal ramifications. Others doubled their contributions, inspired by Maggie's unwavering commitment to the cause. Volunteers rallied around her, organizing grassroots campaigns to counter misinformation and amplify positive stories emerging from the movement. Behind the scenes, Maggie and Alex worked closely with law enforcement to ensure the investigation proceeded fairly and transparently. They collaborated with advocacy groups to draft legislation aimed at protecting whistleblowers and holding corporations accountable for unethical practices. Slowly but surely, their efforts began yielding results, testimonies from victims, policy reforms, and increased awareness about systemic issues plaguing marginalized communities. Yet, despite their accomplishments, personal costs mounted. Exhaustion etched lines into Maggie's face, and Alex struggled with recurring nightmares tied to his past trauma. Both found solace in each other's company, leaning on their shared experiences to navigate the emotional toll of their journey. Their friendship blossomed into something deeper, a partnership rooted in mutual respect, trust, and a shared vision for a better future. One evening, as they walked together through the park where it all began, Maggie paused beneath the ancient oak tree. Its branches swayed gently in the breeze, casting dappled shadows across the ground. Turning to Alex, she placed a gentle hand on his arm. "We've come a long way since that day," she said softly, her eyes reflecting the golden hues of sunset. "But there's still so much work to do." Alex nodded, smiling faintly. "And we'll keep doing it, together." As they stood side by side, watching the sky shift from amber to indigo, Maggie felt a profound sense of peace. Though the fight was far from over, she knew they'd planted seeds of hope that would continue to grow long after they were gone. In a world hungry for light, even the smallest sparks could kindle extraordinary change. The aftermath of the gala left Maggie and Alex grappling with the weight of their choices. While exposing corruption had been a monumental victory for justice, it came at a cost neither could have fully anticipated. The media frenzy intensified, dissecting every detail of their lives under harsh scrutiny. Supporters hailed them as champions of truth, but critics painted them as reckless idealists endangering innocent people in pursuit of fame. Caught between admiration and animosity, they struggled to maintain focus on their original mission, fostering kindness and compassion in a fractured world. For Maggie, the physical toll became impossible to ignore. Her once steady hands now trembled when she reached for her teacup, and dark circles shadowed her eyes despite her best efforts to rest. Sarah grew increasingly concerned, urging her grandmother to slow down before exhaustion took its toll permanently. "You're 78 years old," Sarah reminded her gently one evening as they sat together in the living room. "You've done more than anyone could ask of you. Let someone else take the lead for a while." But Maggie shook her head stubbornly. "This isn't just about me anymore," she replied, her voice firm despite her fatigue. "It's about everyone who believes in what we're trying to achieve. If I step back now, it'll look like we're giving up. And that's exactly what they want." Sarah sighed, knowing there was no convincing Maggie otherwise, not yet, anyway. Instead, she focused on supporting her however she could, managing logistics behind the scenes and shielding her from unnecessary stress. Meanwhile, Alex shouldered much of the public-facing work, stepping up as a spokesperson for the foundation even as his own vulnerabilities threatened to overwhelm him. Each interview, speech, or appearance reopened old wounds Alex thought he'd healed. Reporters probed relentlessly, asking questions designed to provoke doubt rather than understanding. "How do we know you're not manipulating this movement for your gain?" one journalist demanded during a particularly hostile exchange. "Your past speaks for itself." Alex clenched his fists beneath the table, forcing himself to remain calm. "My past doesn't define me," he responded evenly. What defines me is how I choose to move forward. And right now, I'm choosing to help others avoid the mistakes I made. Though his words resonated with many, they did little to silence detractors determined to discredit him. Anonymous threats escalated, targeting not only Maggie and Alex, but also key members of the Foundation's team. One volunteer received a package containing disturbing images. Another found their car vandalized overnight. Fear began seeping into spaces once filled with hope, casting a pall over their efforts. Maggie refused to let paranoia dictate their actions. Yet, late at night, when sleep eluded her, she couldn't shake the feeling that danger loomed closer with each passing day. She confided in Alex during one such restless moment, sitting side by side on her porch as stars glittered faintly above. I never imagined kindness could make enemies, she admitted quietly, wrapping her arms around herself against the chill. Isn't it supposed to unite people? Alex hesitated before answering, choosing his words carefully. Kindness challenges power structures, he said finally. It forces people to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and the systems they benefit from. That's why it scares them, and why it's so important. His insight struck a chord deep within Maggie. She nodded slowly, absorbing his perspective. Then we can't stop, she murmured resolutely. No matter how hard it gets. Their determination carried them through weeks of relentless pressure, but cracks began forming beneath the surface. Volunteers grew wary, some stepping away altogether to prioritize their safety. Donations dwindled as fear spread among contributors worried about association with controversy. Even Claire, whose revelations had sparked the investigation, distanced herself after receiving veiled threats aimed at her remaining family. Amidst the turmoil, Maggie found solace in small victories. A local shelter funded by the foundation opened its doors to families in need. Schools implemented anti-bullying programs inspired by their advocacy. Strangers continued sharing stories of kindness sparked by Maggie's example, reminding her that goodness still thrived even in uncertain times. Still, the strain wore heavily on both her and Alex. One afternoon, while reviewing plans for an upcoming community event, Alex snapped unexpectedly, slamming his fist against the table. Why does it feel like we're fighting a losing battle? He exclaimed, frustration boiling over. Every time we take 2 steps forward, something pushes us 3 steps back. Maggie placed a steady hand on his arm, meeting his gaze with unwavering resolve. Because change is never easy, she said firmly. But that doesn't mean it's not worth fighting for. Her words grounded him momentarily, though the underlying tension remained unresolved. Over time, they learned to lean on each other more openly, sharing fears and doubts without judgment. Their bond deepened into something akin to family, a partnership forged in adversity, yet strengthened by shared purpose. As winter approached, bringing shorter days and colder nights, Maggie decided to organize a nationwide initiative called A Day of Kindness. Inspired by the overwhelming response to their earlier campaigns, she envisioned a single day dedicated to acts of service, large and small, uniting communities across state lines. Schools, businesses, and individuals pledged participation, promising to document their contributions online using hashtags like hashtag #BeLikeMaggie and hashtag #SpreadTheLight. Preparations consumed their waking hours, leaving little room for rest. Despite her protests, Sarah insisted on accompanying Maggie to events, ensuring she ate properly and avoided overexertion. Alex juggled interviews and logistical planning, occasionally disappearing for hours at a time to process the emotional weight of their journey. On the morning of A Day of Kindness, anticipation buzzed in the air. Social media platforms lit up with posts from participants eager to share their experiences. Neighbors helped elderly residents clear snow from driveways. Families volunteered at food banks and shelters. Children crafted handmade cards for hospital patients, spreading joy with simple gestures. By sunset, thousands of images flooded feeds worldwide, showcasing humanity at its best. Yet, amid the celebration, tragedy struck unexpectedly. During a cleanup effort at a local park, a young boy fell into a frozen pond while attempting to retrieve a stray ball. Without hesitation, Alex dove in after him, pulling the child to safety before collapsing onto the icy bank. Paramedics rushed to the scene, treating Alex for hypothermia as horrified onlookers looked on. News of the incident spread rapidly, reigniting debates about the risks associated with grassroots activism. Some praised Alex as a hero willing to risk his life for others. Others argued that recklessness undermined the foundation's credibility. Through it all, Maggie stood steadfastly by his bedside in the hospital, refusing to leave until he regained consciousness. When Alex finally awoke hours later, groggy but coherent, his first words were an apology. I didn't mean to cause trouble, he mumbled weakly, his voice hoarse from oxygen tubes. I just saw him fall. Maggie squeezed his hand tightly, tears streaming down her face. You saved a life today, she whispered fiercely. That's not trouble, that's courage. His recovery proved slow but steady, buoyed by an outpouring of support from strangers touched by his selflessness. Letters arrived daily, thanking him for embodying the spirit of kindness they sought to emulate. Though humbled by the attention, Alex struggled with survivor's guilt, haunted by thoughts of what might have happened if he hadn't acted quickly enough. To help him heal emotionally, Maggie encouraged Alex to channel his energy into writing, a form of therapy she'd relied on during her darkest days. Together, they drafted essays and op-eds highlighting lessons learned throughout their journey, emphasizing resilience, empathy, and the importance of standing up for what's right. Publishers took notice, offering contracts to compile their reflections into a book titled Acts of Light, Finding Hope in Hard Times. The project provided a much-needed reprieve, allowing Maggie and Alex to reflect on their accomplishments while acknowledging areas where growth was still needed. As chapters took shape, they realized the Foundation's true legacy lay not in grand gestures or sweeping reforms, but in the countless connections fostered along the way. By spring, momentum began shifting in their favor once again. Investigations into corporate corruption yielded convictions, vindicating Alex publicly and restoring faith in the Foundation's integrity. Supporters returned in droves, eager to contribute to initiatives addressing systemic inequities exposed by their advocacy. Volunteers re-engaged with renewed enthusiasm, organizing events that celebrated progress while addressing ongoing challenges. Through it all, Maggie and Alex remained inseparable, bound by shared struggles and triumphs. They laughed together over missteps, cried over setbacks, and marveled at the ripple effects of their work. Though scars lingered, both visible and invisible, they carried them proudly, reminders of battles fought and won. One sunny afternoon, as they strolled through the park where their journey had begun, Maggie paused beneath the ancient oak tree. Its branches swayed gently in the breeze, casting dappled shadows across the ground. Turning to Alex, she smiled warmly. We've planted seeds of hope here, she said softly, gesturing toward the sprawling roots anchoring the tree to the earth. Even if we don't see them bloom fully, they'll keep growing long after we're gone. Alex nodded, returning her smile with quiet gratitude. And maybe someday someone else will sit under this tree and wonder what started it all. Together, they walked away, leaving behind footprints that would soon fade, but memories that would endure forever. Years passed, and though the whirlwind of fame and controversy eventually subsided, the ripple effects of Maggie and Alex's kindness continued to shape lives across generations. The foundation they had built, the Maggie Thompson Kindness Initiative, had grown into a beacon of hope for countless individuals, its reach extending far beyond what either of them could have imagined. Yet, as time marched on, it became clear that no act of compassion exists in isolation. Each one plants seeds that grow invisibly, nourished by love, courage, and resilience. For Maggie, the twilight years of her life were marked by quiet contentment rather than ceaseless activity. She slowed down significantly, allowing others to take the reins of leadership within the foundation, while she focused on nurturing her own spirit. Her garden remained her sanctuary, bursting with color even in the coldest months thanks to greenhouses she'd lovingly constructed with Alex's help. Neighbors often stopped by unannounced, bringing baked goods or simply sitting beside her as she tended to her flowers. These small moments reminded her that connection, the simplest yet most profound form of kindness, was what truly mattered. Alex, too, found peace in ways he never thought possible. After recovering from his near-fatal plunge into the icy pond, he dedicated himself fully to advocacy work, becoming a respected voice for ethical practices in business and technology. He wrote extensively about his experiences, publishing not only the book Acts of Light, but also contributing articles to major publications worldwide. His transformation from disgraced entrepreneur to compassionate advocate served as living proof that redemption was always within reach, if one dared to seek it. Despite their differing paths, Maggie and Alex remained inseparable, bound by a bond deeper than friendship. They celebrated milestones together, the launch of new programs, the opening of community centers named after Maggie, and even the weddings of volunteers who met through the foundation. On quieter days, they revisited old haunts like the park where their journey began, sharing stories of how far they'd come and marveling at the unforeseen beauty of scars left behind. One crisp autumn morning, as golden sunlight filtered through the trees, Maggie sat on her porch sipping tea. A stack of letters lay beside her, penned by strangers whose lives had been touched by her kindness. Some thanked her for inspiring them to volunteer. Others shared tales of overcoming adversity because of her example. Each word carried weight, reminding her that even the smallest gestures could spark extraordinary change. As she read, Sarah approached, carrying a tray of freshly baked cookies. "Grandma," she said gently, "you've got another visitor." Maggie looked up, surprised. Over the years, visitors had dwindled as attention shifted elsewhere. But today, standing at the gate, was Claire, the woman who'd risked everything to expose corporate corruption. She looked older now, her hair streaked with gray, but her eyes still burned with determination. "May I come in?" Claire asked hesitantly, clutching a worn envelope. "Of course," Maggie replied warmly, gesturing toward the chair beside her. "It's good to see you again." Claire settled awkwardly, glancing around the cozy porch before speaking. "I wanted to thank you for everything. Because of you and Alex, my son's name has finally been cleared. The authorities reopened his case, and they formally acknowledged the role he played in exposing those crimes." Tears welled in Claire's eyes as she handed Maggie the envelope. Inside was a certificate of exoneration, a formal apology issued posthumously to Claire's son, recognizing him as a whistleblower instead of a scapegoat. Maggie held it reverently, understanding the magnitude of what this document represented, not just vindication for one family, but validation for all who fought against injustice. "You did this," Maggie said softly, pressing the paper back into Claire's hands. "Your bravery made it happen." Claire shook her head, smiling faintly. "No, we did it. Together. Without your movement, without your belief in doing what's right, none of this would have been possible." The encounter left Maggie reflective, stirring memories of the countless lives intertwined with hers through acts of kindness. That evening, as she tucked herself into bed, she pulled out an old journal gifted to her by Alex during his recovery. Flipping through its pages, she found entries documenting their struggles and triumphs, each one a testament to the power of perseverance. Inspired, she picked up her pen and began writing. "To whoever finds these words someday, life will test you in ways you cannot predict. It will break you, bruise you, and leave you questioning whether any of it matters. But here's the truth. It does. Every act of kindness ripples outward, touching hearts and changing destinies long after we're gone. Do not underestimate the light you carry within you, for even the smallest flame can dispel the darkest shadows." She closed the journal, setting it aside with a satisfied sigh. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference. But tonight, she allowed herself to rest, knowing she'd done all she could. Spring arrived, painting the world anew with vibrant blooms and renewed energy. The town buzzed with excitement over plans for a special event honoring Maggie's contributions. Organizers transformed the park into a celebration of kindness, erecting murals depicting her face alongside quotes from her speeches. Local artists performed songs inspired by her story, while children decorated benches with colorful handprints symbolizing unity. At the center of it all stood a young sapling planted in Maggie's honor, an oak tree destined to grow tall and strong, much like the legacy she created. Beneath it lay a plaque engraved with her favorite saying, "Even the smallest light can dispel the darkest shadows." On the day of the dedication ceremony, hundreds gathered to pay tribute. Alex delivered a heartfelt speech, recounting the journey they'd embarked upon together and emphasizing the importance of continuing their work. "Maggie taught us that kindness isn't passive," he declared, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "It's an action, a choice we make every single day. And if we keep choosing it, there's nothing we can't overcome." When it was Maggie's turn to speak, she stepped forward slowly, leaning on Sarah's arm for support. Though frail, her presence commanded silence, drawing every eye to her weathered but radiant face. "I didn't set out to change the world," she began, her voice soft yet unwavering. "All I wanted was to remind people of something simple, that everyone deserves to be seen, heard, and loved. If I've done that, if I've helped even one person feel less alone, then my life has been worthwhile." Applause erupted, echoing through the park as tears streamed down faces young and old. For many, Maggie wasn't just a figurehead. She was a symbol of hope, proving that age and circumstance couldn't diminish the power of compassion. In the weeks that followed, Maggie grew increasingly reflective, sensing that her time was drawing near. She spent her final days surrounded by loved ones, flipping through photo albums and sharing laughter-filled memories. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through her bedroom window, she turned to Sarah with a serene smile. "Do you think anyone will remember me?" she asked quietly, her gaze drifting toward the garden, visible beyond the glass. Sarah took her hand firmly, squeezing it reassuringly. "How could they forget? You changed the world, Grandma." Maggie chuckled softly, closing her eyes as sleep claimed her. When she passed away peacefully that evening, the entire town mourned her loss, but also celebrated her life, ensuring her memory lived on through the countless lives she touched. Years later, the oak tree planted in Maggie's honor towered majestically over the park, its branches sheltering picnickers, dreamers, and wanderers alike. Beneath it, a young girl knelt, placing a bouquet of wildflowers atop the plaque. Turning to her mother, she asked curiously, "Who was she?" Her mother smiled, brushing a strand of hair from the girl's face. She was proof that even the smallest acts of kindness can change the world. And so Maggie's legacy endured, not just in monuments or memorials, but in the hearts of those who continued spreading light wherever darkness lingered. Her story served as a reminder that kindness, though often unseen, carries immeasurable weight, and that every act, no matter how humble, has the potential to transform lives forever.